right, welcome everybody to Finding Truth. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. And tonight we're going to be talking about straight epistemology. If you guys don't know what straight epistemology is, well, tonight you're going to learn because we have Daniel with us, and Daniel has done quite a bit of work on this, has interacted with people that do this for quite some time, and so he has some experience, and tonight we're going to be talking to him about this special topic. So Dan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, my name is Daniel Ray. I am a staff apologist with Watchman Fellowship here in Arlington, Texas. We are a mile away from Cowboys Stadium or AT&T Stadium. I live in Poolville, Texas, which is about an hour away from my office. I've been on staff at Watchman Fellowship for a year and a half. We are an interfaith evangelism ministry. We outreach to Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Islam, Muslims, and we talk about cults, New Age, and other movements that are affecting the church and the culture that are opposed to Christianity. And so I've been with Watchman since late 2019. And so one of the things that I have done in my research at Watchman is, and before I was at Watchman, I was involved very interested in street epistemology, having read myself this book in 2013, A Manual for Creating Atheists by Peter Boghossian, who is a philosopher at Portland State University. But I have a master's degree in apologetics from Houston Baptist University, cultural master's degree. I have a education degree with a minor in science, and what else did I minor in? In English. And I have a year of seminary in language, Greek and Hebrew. And I've written a book, The Story of the Cosmos. I have it somewhere on my shelf. I don't know where it is. Anyway, most of you probably know what that book is. So I've done quite a few things. I have a YouTube channel. I have a really spicy Twitter account. If you follow me on Twitter, you know what I'm talking about. And I've been on Santi's channel several times, so it's nice to be here.
All right. Well, Dan, why don't we just get started with the questions about straight epistemology, and mainly the question, what is it? What is straight epistemology?
Well, it's like I said, it's a movement that began in 2013 with this book by a philosopher, Peter Boghossian, who I think he's still at Portland State University. I'm not sure. He wrote this book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. Basically, it's not a very favorable. I mean, if you know nothing about street epistemology and you picked up this book, you would realize right away it is right on the same level as Richard Dawkins' God delusion, that kind of vitriolic intensity, anti-theistic intensity. And Boghossian makes the suggestion in the book that the way to have conversations with Christians is to come in through a sort of a backdoor way and question how they know what they know, rather than actually dealing with apologetic material like the Bible and arguments for God's existence, morality, and all these kinds of things. So it started a movement in 2013, and it kind of took off on the internet. And Dr. Boghossian is no longer really involved with it. And I think as a professional philosopher, it's not a professional philosopher book. You think of professional philosophy along the lines of somebody like Graham Oppy, who's a leading atheist philosopher. This is not like that. This is more street level, if you will, aimed at skeptics to encourage them to go and try to talk Christians out of their faith in a sort of, I would say the way Boghossian would have you do it, through civil conversation, asking questions about how we know what we know, which is epistemology. So there's an important distinction to make. Though this book is about creating atheists, it uses the word epistemology. Epistemology is a formal philosophy of knowledge, knowing how we know. And it is a formal discipline with published peer-reviewed papers and all of that. A Manual for Creating Atheists is not in that same vein. And I think, and this is just my own personal opinion, I think Dr. Boghossian was probably advised by his professional philosopher colleagues that this was not a step up, a reputable step up in the professional peer-reviewed philosophical papers. It's not epistemology. It teaches you a couple of techniques to how to ask Christians tricky questions that many philosophers are still wrestling with, and many Christians have never really thought about themselves. And that was 2013. the movement sort of took on an online popularity on the atheist community. And I say atheist community loosely because I'm not really even sure as I say that what that means, except a loose coalition of people that are online who are atheists. That's what I mean by that. And it became very popular over the last 8 years. And if you're on YouTube or social media, you know of a gentleman named Anthony Magdabosco, who used street epistemology to sort of transform his combatant attacks. Anthony used to go out into the San Antonio Square at the Alamo and basically attack street preachers, not physically, but just verbally, like, hey, it's all ridiculous. And Anthony'd have difficult conversations with his own relatives about Christianity. And I believe him, he says street epistemology changed the way he approaches conversations with theists. And so I think Anthony really took it and ran with it. He has a YouTube channel with several thousand followers and several thousand videos, hours and hours of talking to people on college campuses and in public places about why they believe what they believe. But largely, I would say that with all due respect, I don't mean this as a derogatory put down, that I think that street epistemology its lifeblood is coming from the atheist community. And everybody that I've ever engaged who is a street epistemologist is an atheist. And so my goal was to understand it as best I could and to inform Christians, not to avoid talking to people who practice street epistemology, but go into the conversation with your eyes wide open and recognize that you're probably talking to an atheist who probably has a goal in mind of getting you to sort of doubt and question your faith. So a manual for creating atheists, we need to probably make this really clear. Boghossian sets out a couple of erroneous definitions of faith. Not long after the book came out, Peter Boghossian was in a debate on Unbelievable with Justin Brierley. And Peter Boghossian was debating a professional philosopher whom I know and have talked to and have interviewed and have had on our book club, Tim McGrew. Tim, you may know his wife, Lydia. They're both published. And so Tim is a professional philosopher, and he really tackled Boghossian's definitions of faith, and they got into conversations of epistemology. You can Google that conversation. It's still out there online, and you can listen to it. And Tim was very professional about it, very cordial, and you could see right away the deficit and the dearth, the lack of formal, sophisticated philosophy that Boghossian was advocating. And this was more, from Boghossian's perspective, more of a rhetorical device for getting Christians to doubt their faith. And so, but now I would say that online, there's, 9 years later, there are a group of people that have kind of strayed away from Boghossian. They're not advocating, Peter, thus says Peter or anything. But the problem, so they want to, even some have said they'd rather move it away from this book. There was another book that came out just a few years ago. Boghossian authored it with James Lindsay, and it's How to Have Impossible Conversations. I did a whole video review on this book as well. They tried to, the language is a little bit toned down. It's not so aggressive as the Boghossian book, the original Boghossian book. So there's a lot of people that sort of want to distance themselves from that sort of vitriolic language. But it must be said that in 2013, Peter Boghossian thought faith was a disease or a disorder that should be in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for psychological psychiatric disorders. He thinks that's how low he thought of faith. And I've never seen a street epistemology video or blog or paper that has repudiated that position. In fact, if you go on streetepistemology.com, you will find both of these books on their resource list, along with John Loftus's Outside of Test for Faith. James Lindsay also has another book called Everybody's Wrong About God. So if you knew nothing about street epistemology and you went to their resources page on streetepistemology.com, you could find out on your own very quickly that this was a movement rooted in popular atheism. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, and you mentioned that there's two faulty definitions of faith. One of them being in belief without evidence. The other one pretending to know things that you don't know. Those are the two definitions that he uses. But then I believe it's in chapter 3 where he talks about his dream or how he envisions society in the future. It would be to have legions of people who are street epistemologists that will go and basically, I'm going to read the quote for you guys right here. So just so you get a kind of like an idea, and it's just going to be a short quote of the things that he says in the book. And he says that he envisions these legions of people who view interactions with faithful or faithful individuals, people that believe, as clinical interventions. So basically, he thinks that whenever you're talking to a street epistemology, and I'm not saying that he thinks this now, but basically, he used to think that, at least when he wrote the book, that whenever a street epistemologist, whoever does that, like whoever comes to you and talks to you as a Christian or as a believer or anything like that, that they are doing a medical intervention because you believe, because of your faith. And so this is the view that Boghossian has or had. And like Dan said, he hasn't seen anybody really kind of like say things against that. And I have interacted with a few street epistemologists, and I have never gotten to the point to actually ask the question, do you guys actually believe that or not? But that is an interesting thought about the book. And I just wanted to point that out so you guys know that if you guys ever encounter somebody who is doing street epistemology, this may be an idea or something or a thought that they have in their mind as far as like what you believe, that they're actually doing a medical intervention for you. And the thing is, though, that street epistemology is kind of like growing, and it's becoming a little bit popular amongst the atheist people. And so they go to universities, they go to different places and try to talk to young Christians and basically put doubt, about what they believe. But anyway, I guess since I said that, my next question, Dan, will be, why do you think Christians need to know about this, apart from the things that I just said?
Well, I think it's important because, number one, as it exists today, I've engaged with it for years. I've made several videos about it, and I've had, I think, 3 or 4 of the videos that I've done critiquing street epistemology reviewed by what I would consider to be the top street epistemology practitioners on the internet. And they were very favorable about the review. It's kind of surprised me because I was openly critical about what I thought was wrong with it. But I think there's a couple of reasons why I think Christians should be aware of this. Number one, now as it stands, I think there's a large group of street epistemologists who are genuinely desirous of having friendly conversations with people. So that's important. I think we can take advantage of the civility. We've always tried to be civil with our skeptic friends. I mean, that's always a good bridge to build if you're having genuine conversations. And so that's an important thing to emphasize, that I'm not here to call out anybody, to demean any particular street epistemology, or even Peter Boghossian himself, who is friends with, I think his name's Phil Vischer, the gentleman who created VeggieTales. So Peter has Christian friends, and a lot of street epistemologists, a lot of atheists are interested in this because they have relatives or friends or coworkers, and they want to learn to have better conversations with theist friends. I genuinely see that. I think Anthony Magnabosco has genuinely learned to take a more humble approach to asking people questions. Now, I still think Anthony thinks atheism is the best game in town. And I think a lot of atheists who practice it still think atheism is the way to go. But I will say that I think I've seen a lot, because I've been in their forums, I've been in the Discord, I've been on their videos, and I see a lot of people going, how do I have a better conversation with my dad or my Christian mom or my brothers or people that I work with? So I think there is something to be said for the positivity that they presently emphasize. But in saying that too, I think the underlying idea that you brought up, Santi, is the street epistemologists will generally look at themselves as interventionists. This book, that term actually gets used more in this book, interventionist. Street epistemologist doesn't get really used in this book as much as it does in this book, but the idea of interventionist is emphasized in this book. And you get the general impression. I mean, there's specific examples on page 80 where they're talking about hostage negotiation. And if you pick up this book and practice it, there are different levels that they walk you through. But at the end of the book, if you get this and you go out and practice it, you are perceived as an interventionist, someone who has the superior epistemology, and you're going to help me out of my what you perceive to be my foolish belief without evidence, or believing in things I'm just pretending to believe in, things that I know aren't true. So they want to help you out of that. They're just assuming that faith is bad, that belief in God is bad, epistemically untenable, unverifiable, untestable. And so you just need to be, I think Christians just need to be aware of these things. I'm not saying this to avoid having conversations with street epistemologists, but be aware of it. Now, there are some, I've done a couple of videos. This is really interesting. I did a couple of videos of a gentleman named Ty, who runs a YouTube channel, who actually does videos with atheists, like literally by the book. He is like to the T, he's doing this. And I thought, well, here's a great example of the way Peter Boghossian recommends you do street epistemology. And so I did 2 videos looking at Ty's video, and then the street epistemologist picked that one up, and there was like 4 or 5 of them discussing this, and they all kind of concluded that Ty wasn't doing street epistemology the best way. He wasn't the best example of a street epistemologist. So there's really, it's sort of a loose coalition. It's not really a doctrine of sorts, but yet it is. And you don't really see this until you start criticizing it. And the minute you start criticizing it, one person will say, well, that's not street epistemology. Somebody else will say, well, that's not street epistemology. This is street epistemology. But then when you ask them, in a general sense, when they're among themselves, they'll say there's no real dogma. There's no real leadership to it. There's no real, way to go about street epistemology. But if you go on streetepistemology.com, you get the opposite impression. There is a certain way to do this. There is a certain emphasis on it. There's ways to have better conversations. Here are the techniques. Here are the questions to ask. So it's really kind of on the one hand, we want to get away from Boghossian, but on the other hand, we're not really making a concerted effort to renounce a lot of the things that he's saying in this book. And so, especially when this appears as a resource on their website, you kind of go, okay, so you want to unburden yourself of the atheism. But then I would have some specific statements that would say that you don't agree with Boghossian's ideas about faith, or that Christians suffer from a psychiatric disorder because they have faith in God. So it's kind of I want to emphasize what is good. I don't want to be overly critical about it. But at the same time, we do have reason to recognize, I think at heart, this is just an extension of new atheism, really.
Yeah. How do you think Christians should deal about this straight epistemology? And before you answer that question, I'm just going to let you guys know that I've seen quite a few questions in the chat. We're going to get to those at the end. Hopefully, we'll answer as many as we can, and if we have time. So don't worry about it. We will answer some of those questions. And so then how should we deal with that?
Well, first of all, it's like anything. It's like what Richard Dawkins did for new atheism. A lot of people champion the idea that Richard turned our noses back to the Bible because suddenly new atheism was popular after 9/11. Harris and Dawkins and Dennett and I always forget the Hitchens. Yes, the late Christopher Hitchens. This body of work really got Christians to re-examine their faith and to talk about it and to bring it out into the public square again. So in the one sense, we should rejoice at the opportunity that there are people that are skeptics that are willing to talk about this with Christians. And so we should respond, as 1 Peter 3:15 says, with gentleness, respect, and humility. That doesn't mean just lay aside, our differences, but to recognize that you can compassionately convey the truth of Scripture to someone. And so be aware, though, that if you do try to, like in one of the videos I reviewed, Ty asked Danny, a friend of mine, somebody that I know, what got you into Christianity? And Danny said, the Bible. And Ty says, well, I don't want to talk about that. We don't have to talk about the Bible. We don't want to talk about the Bible. I just want to know how you came to your belief. Like, what method did you use to come to a belief in God? So when they ask you the questions, what's in the back of their mind is this idea that you used some kind of method to test whether or not your belief in God was true. And so they have this underlying philosophical assumption that knowledge comes about through testing empirical means. And so at the foundation, really briefly, to go on a little philosophical excursus, what a lot of them are really doing is a kind of form of logical positivism or verificationism that was popular in the 1920s and 30s in the 20th century. And it was a philosophy of knowledge that said, if you can't empirically verify it, and I'm being very short for the sake of time here, if you can't empirically verify a truth claim, then it's not a truth claim. Then it's not counted as real knowledge. And the Vienna School and those philosophers and mathematicians that were involved in that didn't like the idea that religious knowledge had any legitimacy whatsoever. So they tried to devise an epistemology that could do away with religious language and religious claims and religious knowledge. And so they came up with this idea that we should empirically test all truth claims. And if a truth claim can't be empirically tested, we should discard it. But of course, the philosophy itself didn't last very long, because the very idea that we must test truth claims in order for them to be valid is not a claim that you can make. It's not a claim that you can test empirically. You can't test the underlying foundation of logical positivism. And so, to give you a street epistemology example, many of them, to their credit, will say that, yes, I agree that the truth is not relative, that there's objective truths. A popular example that a street epistemologist might use in a conversation with you is to say, flip a quarter, it lands on my hand, and they'll ask you, so is it heads or tails? And your hand's covering it, so they say, well, we don't know. And right, you get the theist to say, well, I don't know. How would we know? Well, the guy would have to remove his hand so that you could see the quarter. And so they use this as it mixes metaphysical and theological knowledge with empirical knowledge. They think that testing to see if God is real is in the same sort of philosophical category as lifting my hand to see if the quarter is heads or tails. And so right away, they're conflating, philosophically speaking, they're conflating metaphysics with physics, basically, that my knowledge claims about God should be empirically demonstrable. And I should give you a test that would show you, just like, showing me that the quarter was heads or tails, that would show you that God exists in the same way. And so that's a kind of confusion, and it's kind of ambiguous and frustrating, because I asked them, I said, what do you mean by a test? Why do you think God, my belief in God or God's existence, must be tested like looking at the back of your hand to see if the quarter is heads or tails? Why do you think that our knowledge of God comes that way? And ask them those kinds of questions, because another thing that you will enter into in a street epistemology conversation is that the street epistemologist will be very reluctant, generally speaking, in my experience, to reveal what they believe. But I think they should, because it's interesting, because they want to know what your most deeply held beliefs are, but they're unwilling a lot of times to share what theirs are. And some people have said, in their defense, they say, well, I don't want to bias the conversation by telling you what I believe. But yet, as you reveal your own personal beliefs, they'll ask more and more questions, and it becomes less of a conversation and more of an interrogation. But that's precisely what Boghossian and Lindsay are trying to get you to do, is to keep the interlocutor, that's the person they're interviewing, on the back burner, answering questions. And the other thing too is, in both books they advise, don't allow your interlocutor to talk about apologetics. Don't let him talk about the Bible. Don't let him talk about the moral argument or the cosmological arguments or the ontological or the teleological arguments. Don't get them into actually those fields. Keep it in the fence of epistemology. Keep it vague and non-specific when you're asking, how do you know that questions? How do you know that questions? And it really is, the longer the conversation goes, the more you'll hear, how do you know that? How do you know that? How do you test that? How do you know that? So I say all this to say that it can be frustrating if you're unprepared for that. And many people are, and find themselves in an uncomfortable position answering questions they've never thought of before, which is fine if you encounter questions you've never thought about before. I'm not saying that's bad. But it gets harder and harder the further down the conversation that you go, because you're just going to get peppered with a series of, how do you know that? How do you know that? How do you know that? And so finally, they will ask you, especially if you're a theist, do you think faith is a reliable way to know if God exists? And so what they do is they take faith in a very reductionistic sort of fashion, I think, with Boghossian's definitions in the back of their mind. And they think, since everybody has faith, there are different faiths out there, that faith is an unreliable way to come to know the truth of of if God exists or not. But the problem is that they think they have reduced your belief in God to one thing, right? They ignore the cumulative case, they ignore your background and testimony. They want to reduce your confidence in your belief, and they want to reduce it down to one thing. And so they think they've successfully isolated this idea of faith and have eliminated all other variables. And they say, well, they get the Christian to think that, well, maybe faith isn't the best way to know if God exists. But it's not. It's not. It's a very attenuated. It's a very erroneous view of how we come to know who God is and what faith is. But I think it's important for people to know all those presuppositions are there in the mind of many people who are practicing street epistemology. I hope that was clear. I just rambled. Sorry.
No, it was clear. And I guess one of the things that I was thinking about what you were saying, that is the fact that you get all these questions, people are asking you all these things and all that stuff. And if you're not ready, it will cause some doubts. And so that kind of like relates to the question that I was going to ask you, because the next question is, does street epistemology lead to truth or point to truth? Mm-hmm. Or does it just lead to doubt?
Yeah, I would say that I've heard street epistemologists say they believe in objective truth, but they are reluctant to define what that is. You might get somebody to say truth is that which accords to reality. You might hear that definition very broadly spoken. I think we could all at least agree in principle on that definition, but that's about as far as they might get. If you ask them to define what the proper epistemology is, they won't necessarily. Some might tell you that they think that the best epistemology or truth claims are those which can be falsified, but that gets into another philosophy of science, Karl Popper, which is very useful in science, but it's not useful as a whole way of knowing. There are many ways and things that we know that we can't falsify. There's nothing wrong with falsification in science. If you want to do a lab experiment, you want to be able to falsify somebody else's results to see if you have some consistency in the hypotheses. But that's not how all knowledge works, right? We have things like love and justice and compassion and beauty and wisdom and all these other kinds of things that we accept and take for granted that none of us can test empirically. Again, there's logical positivism. There's a little bit of Karl Popper and falsification in there, but they don't ever. You're not going to find definitions of truth, solid definitions of truth in either of these books. They're just books written to get conversational books and tactics. It's like Greg Koukle's book in reverse. It's Tactics for Atheists. In a sense, I don't mean to be disrespectfully overgeneralizing, but it's basically tactics, conversational tactics for getting people to doubt. So no, Santi, I don't think it does lead to truth. They're very ambiguous about what truth is. And so right now, even in the SE community, I know one of the things that have come up in talking to SEers are ethical questions. Are we just manipulating people? If you're not presenting, if you're just causing people to doubt and you're not giving them some kind of alternative. I will say, at least Anthony will say, hey, if you're doubting your faith, here's the unbeliever's card. Here's a card for the atheist community of Austin or whatever. At least he'll say, hey, if you want to give up your faith, here's a community of atheists. But other than that, it's they're not really leading you in a direction of, if they take away your faith, what do they give you? They don't give you anything. So it's just sort of a means to doubt, I think, in that sense. Yeah.
Okay. Should we as Christians be worried about the street epistemology?
No.
The reason why I asked that question is because there was a guy in the chat that was basically saying, why are you guys scared? Like, if you have the truth, why is it that you are scared about the street epistemology?
Well, I'm certainly not afraid of it. I've had hours and hours of conversations with some very nice street epistemologists. I've had hours and hours of my videos reviewed by street epistemologists, videos where I was highly critical of street epistemology. I tried to balance my critique with what I thought was positive about it. I actually would say that I have some online friends in the street epistemology atheist community that I enjoy talking to. And so I'm not afraid of them. It's not fear at all. There's no fear at all. I'm just wanting people to be informed. And the people that I enjoy talking to in the SE community appreciate the feedback from a thoughtful Christian. And so I have recently, several hours of dialogue with Nathan Ferguson on the Abstract Activist channel. We've had a good couple of chats. Now, Nathan's an atheist. He knows I know street epistemology, and he knows where I stand, but we still are able to have a civil conversation. I know they don't agree with everything I say, and that's fine. And I'm not trying to get street epistemologists. I have nothing against Anthony or Reed Nicewonder, who does Cordial Curiosity. I have no vendetta, and I'm not afraid of what they're doing. And so what I want to do is present the truth as I'm given the opportunity to do so. And I've presented Christ in the videos that I've done. I've talked to Nathan about belief in God, and they know where I stand. And so, in order that I have the truth, but I'm not afraid of having that truth examined. I've been on myself several atheist channels and YouTube shows over the years on atheist terms, on atheist grounds. So there's no, I speak for myself, there's no fear involved. It's a desire to proclaim the gospel, to proclaim the truth. I run the Atheist Christian Book Club through Watchman Fellowship. That's once a month. We have atheists and skeptics, and we have the best atheist authors and the best Christian authors live with us discussing these things. I learn and listen and contribute to the conversations as I can. We had Graham Oppie on a couple of months ago. We did Richard Dawkins's book. We're having Bart Ehrman, I hope, in the fall. And so there's no fear. And Christians should not be afraid or worried. Jesus says, do not be afraid. Do not worry. It only by worrying, who can add a cubit to your stature? Don't worry. I have overcome the world, John 16:33. In this world, you will have trouble. You will encounter street epistemology conversations that are not easy. I've had very difficult conversations with skeptics and things, but it's not fear. That's definitely not why I'm motivated. I just want Christians to be aware of it, to go into it with eyes wide open, and to model how you can critique somebody you don't agree with without throwing mud at them. And so I'm trying to create a system of critique that I would want other Christians to model if they were to talk to street epistemologists. And I want people to do so informed. I'm not out to get anybody. And everything I've said about street epistemology is out there online. There's no secret back room of street epistemology that I'm exposing. Everything that I've learned from publicly engaging with street epistemologists myself.
Okay, and how do you think the church should prepare the congregation, whether it be young people or not adults, about these types of conversations?
Well, I think number one, that street epistemology is not anything, it's not really on the radar of professional philosophers. I've lived in the DFW area since street epistemology began. I've never, in all my goings and comings out in Dallas, Fort Worth, and Arlington, I have never encountered a street epistemologist out there on the streets doing street epistemology. Now, Anthony does it in Austin or San Antonio. Reed does it in Los Angeles, and I know a couple of other people do it in LA. But other than that, street epistemologists, there's a growing YouTube presence of people out there doing street epistemologies with their channels with different names on it and stuff. But it's not really, it's huge online, I think. But I don't know if it has that same presence, out in the world. Of course, it got even more popular with the pandemic and everybody shut down. And now I'm just going to binge watch videos. So I think it actually has some uptick in popularity on the computer, on the internet. But I think the church can just keep doing what it's doing in terms of teaching people how to do 1 Peter 3:15 with gentleness and respect, and know the word of God and be ready in and out of season to proclaim it however God leads you, and return the civility that I think a lot of street epistemologists want to do. But I think the danger would be to say that every street epistemologist has a different perspective on this book. So I wouldn't say that they're all hiding this in their back pocket. Everybody's different. Some people I've talked to, I genuinely have said to me, they're not interested in the religion question. They're interested in crafting civil dialogue and thoughtful conversation. I believe them. I have no reason to think that they're not, that they're lying to me. Even my friend Nathan, even if he's out to get me and to convert me to atheism, I'm still a nice guy. That's all right. Give me your hardest questions, whatever, no problem. I prefer, I tell all the SE guys, I said, my style is, hey, if you're an atheist and you want to deconvert me, just tell me. I just don't hide that under a rug. I encourage my street epistemology friends to be outspoken and out there and just lay it on the table, what you believe, and have a two-way conversation instead of a one-way interrogation. That's been my critique of the movement. I tell them, I say, don't hide, don't disguise your atheist evangelism under the guise of a civil conversation, when really what you want to do is interrogate someone into a corner of doubt. I said, that's where a lot of the ethical questions are coming up for a lot of people. Am I just, what's the term? I don't mean this disrespectfully, but sea lioning, right? Is that what, do SEers sea lion people? Well, I don't know. I would have to know their motives and intents. But I said, if your motive is to get me to doubt my faith, but you're hiding that under a conversation, a civil conversation, then that's not cool. And so I've been very open and outspoken about that as well, and got a little pushback from that. But I don't want to give the impression, like with atheism, that you can just say, oh, you're a street epistemologist and you do this, 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 and this. You have to take it on a case by case, but just realize that there are certain familiar, similar characteristics that all street epistemologists do share when they engage people in conversation.
All right. So I guess what we're going to do is, in order to have a little bit of time to ask questions from the audience, I'm going to just ask you to give us some resources as far as like what people can use to learn more about this, and also talk about your book, the book that you mentioned at the beginning, the story of the cosmos, like what kind of conversations or things that we see there. Who are the people involved in that book? Because it's not just one individual, obviously, for some of the people that are going to be watching this. And if you didn't know this, then I don't know if I told you this, Explain International was actually funded in Malaysia. So some of the people that are going to be watching this are going to be from Malaysia, and I'm excited about that. And hopefully, they get to know you.
Nice.
And get to know some of the stuff that you have done. So
right.
Why don't you go ahead and give us some resources.
I know Street Epistemology, there's a website, streetepistemology.com, and there's also streetepistemologyinternational.com, and it's run by Anthony Magambosco and Reed Nicewonder, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And there is, Germans and people in Australia and people in England. I know they have people overseas. I'm not sure about, what'd you say, Malaysia? I don't know if people are doing street epistemology there, but there is an international interest that I've seen. I don't know how big it is overseas, but they are a legitimate 501c3 organization that gives donations and to people starting out on their street epistemology endeavors. And I think, I know Anthony Magambosco is an atheist. I know Reed is a skeptic, and other people that I've talked to. Of course, as a Christian, I think atheism is false. But I also am trying to take what they're doing at face value. And if they tell me they're being sincere and they want to know what I believe, I'll take them at face value. And that's what we have to do. I don't want to get into the other aspect of it is a kind of, some of the less experienced practitioners will kind of engage in a psychological evaluation of you. So it's not just a philosophical, theological discussion. It becomes a kind of psychological evaluation of your own state. Where it's not quite as extreme as gaslighting. I wouldn't say that they're gaslighting you, because that involves abuse, and I wouldn't accuse them of that. But the idea is to get you to question your own, the solidity and soundness of your own thinking. And if it's related to a deeply held belief, like they often want to talk about, and you start questioning something that is related to your identity, you will come a little unraveled in the head if this stuff trips you up. It does start to hack away at everything that you identify with your whole life as a Christian or whatever. And so a lot of people, I think, recognize that. But you asked a minute ago about resources and what you can do to engage with street epistemology. I would say, number one, learn about it. There's thousands of videos on street epistemology. You can see how these conversations unfold. The other thing too is to keep in mind, if you watch a video by Anthony Magnabosco from say 2014 and a video from Anthony in 2021, it will be night and day difference. I've even watched this. Now this is just me observing Anthony, that he's even kind of toned down a little bit in the 6 or 7 years I've been watching him. So, props to him for that. That's great. But don't look at a video from 2012 and think, oh, that's what all street epistemologists do. You got to watch a little variety, because they talk about different subjects other than religion. They talk about Santa Claus and your favorite ice cream, or politics, or gun control, or they'll talk about anything. So it's not just the way it's morphed online in the last 8 years. A lot of different people talk about different things. So be careful not to overgeneralize. And as far as resources go, know your scripture, know your Bible, know why you believe what you believe, which is biblical. Know your scriptures, know why you believe what you believe, know a couple of good arguments, kalam. If you got a favorite cosmological or philosophical argument for God's existence, use that. Use your personal testimony. And then I have my friend, you did mention Story of the Cosmos, my friend and co-editor Paul M. Gould, is a Christian philosopher, a top-notch Christian philosopher who writes philosophy for Christians who hear philosophy and go, blah, 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 blah. That if philosophy scares you, you need to read Paul Gould's books. He has a wonderful, Paul is just a prolific writer, and an excellent writer, and very passionate about the gospel, very passionate about philosophy. So if you want some good introduction to solid philosophy, Paul Gould. And then Jamie Dew, who is the president of New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, writes in the same style as Paul Gould. Jamie Dew has a whole book just called Epistemology, How We Know What We Know. And it's epistemology from a Christian perspective. An excellent book. I read that. I've interviewed Paul many times. We have a couple of podcasts about philosophy on Apologetics Profile. And I've also talked to David Beck of Liberty University, who's a professional philosopher. He wrote a book about the arguments for God's existence from a historical perspective. So there's lots of resources to get yourself into. Don't be afraid of philosophy. You don't have to go running to Graham Oppy, the atheist philosopher, to get yourself started. It's very intimidating if you do that. But so know a little philosophy, know your Bible, and be sure to listen to your street epistemology interlocutor, and to recognize they're human too, and put their pants on just like we do, one leg at a time. And it's nothing really new, Santi. It's the same stuff that we've been, as Christians, should be known for, is passionate engagement, humility, and exchange of ideas without getting personal. It's how we should do it. So I want my examples for people to model. I'm not perfect, but I think that's the best way to make inroads with people is through civility. And you can be passionate, but you can be kind as well about what you believe. So,
all right, amen. So I have a question right here, and this is, it says, why will a Christian worry about doubt if they have the truth in their pockets? I think we sort of talked about that.
Why would we worry about what? I didn't hear the word.
Doubt. Why would we worry about doubt? Well, I think that doubt is a very natural part of our fallen nature. If you take the fall seriously, it's what we would call the noetic effects of sin, how sin has affected the mind. And if you look at scripture from Genesis to Revelation, God doesn't pick smart people. He doesn't pick the wisest. He doesn't pick people that are perfect. He picks people that are murderers and adulterers and blasphemers and doubters. And the Bible is filled with God saying, "Come here." And you're like, me? Right? Why did you pick that guy? What? And so God picks the frailest. I mean, Jesus says the meek will inherit the earth. The people who spiritually mourn will inherit the heavens. That God's children are broken, silly, foolish, and sinful. And in fact, when the apostles, this is in Acts, when the apostles were before the council of Sanhedrin, and they were told not to talk about Jesus, the council recognized, there's a Greek word there, idiotes, that they were unlearned men, but they recognized that they had been with Jesus. In other words, that's not a flattering term. Idiotes is from where we get the word idiot.
And Jesus is always explaining to his disciples, "Oh, foolish and slow of heart to believe," in Luke chapter 24. The two disciples are walking with Jesus, who they just spent 3 years with. And one of them says to Jesus, "Are you the only one in Jerusalem who doesn't know what has happened in these last days?" And Jesus is like, "What things?" And so they didn't even recognize visibly who Jesus was. And their expectations of Jesus redeeming Israel were misguided. So it's not that we're afraid of doubt so much as it is that's just what we do as fallen creatures. We have doubts. If you don't have doubts, you're not human. And I've had doubts. I bet I've not. And they're different for different people. What do you struggle with? And so it's not a matter of being afraid. So much as I think it is just a matter of recognizing. I think if when the fear does come in, Santi, I think here's where it comes in. That I look to myself. If I look to my zeal or my knowledge or my love, sometimes it's cold, sometimes it's dry, sometimes it's stale. Sometimes, I wake up in the morning before I have my coffee, I feel like an atheist. But by the time I have my coffee and read a couple of pages in scripture, okay, I'm a theist again, at least. And maybe by the time I get a video done in the afternoon and go to the gym, all right, I'm a Christian again. It's kind of like that sometimes, I'm being a little facetious, but if I look to myself and myself only, I will never be satisfied with the condition of myself. And the whole point of the Holy Spirit's work in my life is to convict me of sin, to show me that I'm weak, broken, and frail. But that if I don't turn to Christ, if I don't look to Jesus as my sufficiency, then I have every reason to be afraid. And this is where other religions, this is the difference between Christianity and other religions. Other religions do capitalize on that fear factor of your inadequacies. And they give you this idea that if you can perform in accordance with these standards, then God will accept you. Christianity is not like that. It's recognizing that we can't perform in accordance with the standards that are given to us, but that Jesus has on our behalf. And so it's not my zeal, my love, my knowledge, my feelings or emotions. It's what Jesus has done for me on Calvary and overcoming death and the grave. And so if I just look to my own sins and failures, yes, I'd be afraid. But if I look to Jesus, if I give him all that stuff, then I have no reason to be afraid. Jesus says, I have not given you a spirit of fear, but of a power and of love and of a sound mind. And so fear comes in when we are too self-focused and not Christ-centered enough. So that's for me where the fear comes in, when I'm too focused on myself and not enough on God or Jesus.
All right. Here's another question. This one is from Eric, and he's asking, what's the best strategy in sharing the gospel with somebody who is doing, or whenever we encounter somebody who is doing the street epistemology?
But it's funny because we are a highly technical and specialized society, aren't we? We want an app for everything. How do I do this? I went online the other day. I tried to look on some videos on how to fix my car. I was working on the front end suspension the other day. I went online to how to fix my washer or how to fix a lawnmower, right? We want all the how-tos, and there's nothing wrong with those questions. Absolutely not. But I think in one sense that this idea that, I'm not saying Eric thinks this, I'm just being general, but this idea that if I adopt a strategy, then I'm going to have success. And I think the best thing to do, and it's not something that it's easy for us to do, because there's a click of a button, we can get anything we want. Pretty much. We can get apples of any time of year. We can go online and click Amazon and bang, I have books at my door in a day, or whatever you want. And we have microwaves. We can get things instantly. And I think the one thing that this disrupts is the kind of mentality that Jesus wants us to have. And if you notice in the Gospels, Jesus, how many times he's referencing agrarian parables in nature, seeds, wheat, bread, and fruit, and all these things that take time to cultivate. That's exactly how I think we must approach street epistemology, and not think it's like a one engagement and done, or one argument or one thing that you can do, but it is a series of things like a farmer does over time. And then, after the farmer's done everything, he still has to wait patiently for a crop. And so I think our goal, the workers, the laborers are few. The harvest takes some time to grow. Paul says, I plant, somebody watered, somebody else gets the harvest. So it's a multi-communal endeavor over time that is best. And I think Eric knows this from experience. It takes you some time to transition from Mormonism. out of Mormonism and then actually into Christianity. It's 7 or 8 years at the very least, I think, what the statistics say. So it's patience. It's patience. You're not going to convert an atheist overnight. You're not going to convert a street epistemologist overnight. But I think, I've been doing this street epistemology stuff since this book came out. So I've been been interested in it for 8 years. I watched Anthony grow on video. I've never met Anthony, but I feel like I know him. And so it's patient cultivation. It takes time. And if you're willing to go into it, the best idea is to go into it with an agrarian mindset, not a microwave mindset. Go in it for the long haul and develop relationships. And, it's probably, if it's 7 or 8 years for somebody to come out of Mormonism, it's probably going to be that long before, somebody comes out of atheism or comes into Christianity. It's a long, endeavoring, agrarian sort of slow food, slow cooking sort of process. Plant seeds, be satisfied with planting seeds or watering, and then just give it time and patience and lots of prayer. So.
All right, here's a different question. This one is from Tyler. And he's saying, so is the most dangerous thing about street epistemology, or I guess he's basically saying that the most dangerous thing about street epistemology is the veil that, they pretend to be objective and neutral in the conversation, and then so you can follow the narrative and basically trust them in some way, I guess.
I don't know what he means by dangerous. I wouldn't label street epistemology as dangerous. I'm not advocating that it's dangerous. It's like if you work at a nuclear power plant and you're 7 and you bring your 7-year-old into the control room and let him push buttons, that's dangerous. But the guy who runs the control room isn't going to let that happen. And if you know how to run the control room, there's still danger involved, but the more you know, the less of a threat it becomes. I think this is true for anything, not just street epistemology. The more you're informed, the less it seems like a threat, right? And that's kind of my attitude too. We'll learn it and know it, dispel whatever sort of accretions that you have in your mind about it. But I certainly, as a Christian who's engaged with this stuff for years, I don't think it's dangerous. The only danger is going into, like anything, is going into something uninformed and unprepared. And, the Bible is replete with be prepared in season and out of season. Be ready to give a defense for the hope that is in you to anyone who asks. And so we should be prepared and we should know. And so there's, but I wouldn't say it's any more dangerous than getting into a car. I mean, the more you know about driving and the more miles you have, the less dangerous it becomes. My friend Brady at work, his teenage daughter is just starting to drive, and Brady was telling me that they were in the car in a parking lot and his daughter was giving him fits and starts. And just in the parking lot, Brady said it was kind of frightening because his daughter kept looking down at the pedals before she would press them. So the car would be going and Brady would say, okay, hit the brake. And she'd look down to find the pedal while the car was still going and there was bushes coming. So the more you know, the better you're prepared. And as someone who has dealt with this for years, I wouldn't say a street epistemology is dangerous. I mean, you could read this book as an informed Christian and know that it's nothing new. I mean, you go all the way back to Democritus and the Greeks, and it's all atoms in the void, and atheism's been around as long as unbelief has been around, as long as man's been around. The church has engaged it for 2,000 years. And as long as Jesus tarries and is coming, we'll be engaging it for another 1,000 or so years. So there's nothing to be afraid of. If you're prepared, there's no fear. And so my heart and my joy is to prepare people to better understand it. But I don't personally consider street epistemology dangerous.
All right. So this is a comment from Nick Sayers. And basically what he's saying is that most people on the streets speak about textual issues like Bible errors, multiple versions of the Bible. Many cults bring up Bart Ehrman. I guess this is a comment as far as like, these are some of the things that we see as being more common than others. And I agree. I think that a lot of people talk about, the supposed corruption of the Bible and stuff like that. And we have dealt with some of those things here on this channel. But then at the same time, street epistemology is something that is growing, and people are using it more. They're going to colleges and stuff like that to have conversations with young believers and all that stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that at the end of the day, there are different issues that we need to talk about, and that's the reason why we're doing the street epistemology. But yeah, Nick, you're completely right.
I didn't hear you on the last part there, Sante.
Oh no, yeah, I was just saying that Nick is completely right as far as like people, talking about like some of the things that you hear during conversations between believers or
right.
That is
with street epistemology, I would say to Nick, with street epistemology, and this changes. I mean, it's always evolving. It's never. I don't mean to say this is always like this all the time, but in general, the advice given by top SE practitioners is to try to avoid in your conversations talking about specific things related to the Christian faith. And so if you're engaged with a seasoned street epistemologist, they will try to steer the conversation away from those issues, even though you want to talk about them. So you will not see a lot of street epistemology videos where the Boghossian and Lindsay both in their How to Have Impossible Conversations tell you to, I know this sounds kind of funny, but they tell you to avoid using facts. Don't let the Christian into his pantry of wisdom and knowledge. Use epistemology instead, and avoid the apologetic arguments, and don't turn your conversations into debate. So everything that Nick had said are usually things that, good conversation that you want to have gets down to that kind of nitty gritty. But in street epistemology, you'll be disappointed if you go look through street epistemology videos that they're having lengthy conversations about textual criticism. Like in a couple of my videos, I make this point. I use a couple of apologetic seeds. I talk about design, and I make a couple of apologetic statements about the Bible and the history of the Bible and science and things. And in the review videos, the street epistemologists just kind of ignored it. That's not what they want to get into. They want to sort of get inside my mind and try to see how I'm thinking. But they're really not interested for whatever reason. They want to just keep the conversation in this psychological, philosophical vein and keep you off of what you may be familiar with. So if you're familiar with the Bible, you want to talk about the Bible. They don't want to talk about the Bible. They want to talk about how you test your belief in God. So you really don't see these robust apologetic discussions in street epistemology in my experience that I've seen. Maybe that'll change, but I don't know. Anyway, right. I'm just rambling, so I don't know if I answered Nick's question or not. I didn't even know. Sorry, Nick.
No, he was pretty much making a comment that one of the most common things that people talk about is textual criticism and stuff like that. Not necessarily as, in a professional manner, but rather like things that they bring up are more related to textual criticism. Anyway, I have not seen any more questions in the chat. And so we're just going to go ahead and try to close shop. Dan, do you have any final thoughts? You could go on, if you're interested in this topic, just browse through streetepistemology.com. It is, it's a one-stop place. You can click on street epistemology content creators. You can click on their resources and see what they're reading. You can really get an overview of what it is. But if you knew nothing about street epistemology and you went to the website, you would see pretty quickly that it was an atheist. It was a phenomenon within the atheist online community. So just remember that at the bottom line, if you're talking to street epistemology, if you hear terms like, how do you know what you know? Do you want to talk about your deeply held beliefs? How do you test that? How do you verify that? How have you come to that conclusion? Things like that you're probably talking to a street epistemologist. And if you're talking to a street epistemologist, you're probably talking to an atheist. I don't say that in a negative sense, just to be aware and have a good conversation, and then come to our book club and see how we have conversations with skeptic friends. atheistchristianbookclub.com. This Thursday, August 5th at 7 p.m. on Zoom, watchman.org/Zoom. We will be featuring live Lawrence Krauss talking about his book from 2012, A Universe from Nothing. Dr. Krauss will be joining us live.
So we have Christians and skeptics, and then we have the author of the book joining us. So this month in August will be an atheist book we're discussing. And come and watch and see how we engage with our skeptic friends and how we model that kind of conversation. So just model charity and whatever things are good, whatever things are noble, whatever things are true, whatever things are just, as Paul says in Philippians, think on these things and make friends with your street epistemology friends.
All right. Well, amen. Thank you all for being here. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with others. And I guarantee you guys this could be helpful to other people out there. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you guys later.